Welcome to Goldfish on Games, where I'm hoping you might indulge me slightly, as just recently a number of things have lined up that meant I could build myself a new computer. And seeing that new hardware isn't really something we cover on the channel, I was just going to build it up myself and just get going with it. But after a few requests I figured, well, let's share the building of my 2021 PC. If you've seen my studio tour video, you might remember seeing my 7-year-old gaming/editing rig, and as you can imagine, this upgrade was well overdue. And seeing that this is all going to be brand new hardware, it's going to be a little bit different to my regular videos. So let's start looking at the parts. First up we have the case, which is bulky and difficult to film, so it's a little bit like me, and I went with the Fractal Define R6. It's not the newest case, but it does have lots of space inside, and is relatively soundproofed and has good airflow, and more importantly, it has a door and a space for a DVD drive. And for the internals, let's start with the CPU, which is the AMD Ryzen 5900X. It's a 12-core, 24-thread CPU, and it should make editing so much faster. I've paired that with the Gigabyte Aorus Master X570 motherboard. As the CPU doesn't come with a cooler, I went with the Noctua NH-D15 chromax.black. This is an absolute beast of a cooler. RAM is provided by 32GB of crucial Ballistics Gamer RAM running at 3600 MHz. Storage is going to be provided by two NVMe drives, a 500GB OS and a 2TB data drive. The GPU was unsurprisingly the hardest thing to get my hands on, so in the end I went with the 3060 Ti. It's not one of the better brands, being PYN, but it was in stock, which meant it was the best choice. And powering all this lot is a Corsair 850X. I've been using this brand of PSU for decades, as they've always been absolutely reliable and solid for me. So let's start putting this thing together. And we have to start with the Mobo, which is surprisingly heavy. I guess it's all those extra heatsinks as well as the metal on the back of it. Now it won't fit our cooler off the bat, we need to take a few steps first. Which means we have to take off the current holder brackets, which is just 4 screws, but make sure to leave the back plate in place. And with that gone, we can now open up this epic box, which is seriously nicely designed by the way. Everything has its own little box inside, there's lots of padding, it is the nicestly packed cooler I've ever seen. And after looking through the instructions, seriously at this point I am definitely reading the instructions so I know what I'm doing, I place these plastic spacers and then put these two plates in place. And with that, we're all ready for the CPU to be installed. And with opening up the box, and this is just empty space. And after taking out that small plastic clamshell with the CPU inside, and then double checking the orientation, it just smoothly slots into place and then gets locked down, ready for the CPU cooler. Which means it's time to grease this CPU up, which I'm going to do by following those earlier instructions, by putting just a small blob of paste down. Now I've tried all the various methods over the years, and to be honest I've not really noticed any difference between any of them. This means we finally get to fit the cooler, and I want to do this now before putting it in the case, as I'll have far more space to work with, as this cooler is big. Most likely way bigger than it needs to be. And part of me is a little surprised that just a few screws will hold this in place, but I guess I have to trust them. And when fitting the cooler, it recommends screwing it a bit at each side at a time, as that should spread the paste out quite evenly. And with a bit of a jump cut, it's done and it's securely held into place. Now this would be the point where I'd show off footage of me clipping on the fans, connecting them to the motherboard and installing the memory. If I had any, as I forgot to record it. Well done me. So instead you can see how little space there actually is with the cooler and RAM in place. There really isn't much room here, and if we fit the second fan, you can see how it ends up being slightly higher up, as it's literally sitting on top of the RAM. Now this might mean that that fan is too high up to fit in the case. I won't really know until we actually put it into the case and I try to close it later on, so that'll be a nice surprise. The last parts I want to deal with before actually putting this into the case is to get those drives into place, as you need to take these heat sinks off first, and that could be a bit of a pain if I have to reach down into the case. And to fit these you also need to add the standoffs yourself, as it supports the different sizes. Thankfully this is a relatively quick step once you find the parts in the box, which had quite a lot of stuff in it, including stickers, booklets and cables. But each standoff and screw got its own individual bag, which really doesn't seem like the most ideal solution. Why not just put them all together? The drives themselves just slot in at an angle and then get held in place by a single screw. Which means we can move on to the power supply, and these tend to be thought as boring, but a good one is so important, as it can make for a nice stable system. Or if it's bad, well, things can be horribly unstable and cause all sorts of weird issues. And for this build I am actually going to try and make everything nice and neat. So the goal is to only connect the cables that are needed, which is easy to do with this well packaged power supply. And like the cooler, it has lots of padding, and the cables themselves get their own little bag to hold them in. It's at this point I ended up creating a bit of a pain point for myself, but I wouldn't realise that until a little while later. And it'd be interesting to hear if any of you could tell what that pain point was ahead of time. And after attaching the bracket to the PSU and then fitting it into place, it's time to put the motherboard in there. And this also gave me my first chance to see if that cooler and that second fan would really fit in this case. Now I had double checked against various quality checklists and reviews, and I was sure that it would do. But that means nothing until you actually try it. And what shouldn't have been all that surprising, it actually fit perfectly. All that research paid off. And I have to say I do like this new design of Mobo that has that back panel all integrated into the board itself. There's no need to push that flimsy bit of metal into place, while double checking that it's the right way round and everything's correct, and then try and fit the motherboard through it. It just simplifies so much. Now I'm not sure why it took so long to get to this point, but I think it's been a few generations since this became the norm, so I think I'm just massively out of date here. And with it all in nice and snug, it's time to screw the board into place. Which doesn't take too long, as the case already had all the standoffs in place and a nice little bag of screws that were marked ready for its use. And with that done, it was time to connect up the power. And this ended up being too spicy for YouTube. Even with the audio muted, you could still hear the swearing as I was trying to fit those various plugs through the grommets and then fit it to the motherboard itself. It was absolutely painful in every sense of the word. It would have made so much more sense to have connected the power cables to the board to start with, and then fed those cables through the hole afterwards, and then finally connected it to the PSU. So if you're going to take anything from this video, please remember that. The motherboard cables was the next step, and thankfully this was one of the easier jobs that I've done. As everything was nicely keyed, they were all in their own little blocks, and the front panel even had this nice little plastic guide. So you just put it in there, then slotted it into place. So the last thing to fit had to be the GPU. Now I know that PNY is a very average maker of graphics cards, aka they're never the best, but also rarely the worst. But this thing costs quite a bit of money. And outside the card, there's almost nothing else in this box. You get a fold-out guide for fitting it, and that was pretty much it. No cables, no drivers, no other fun things like a case badge. literally just the card in an anti-static bag. Thankfully, I don't really need any of those other things, but just look at the range of case badges that came with the other parts. Even the cooler had a chunky metal case badge. And amazingly, the cheapest looking one was for the CPU, it was just a plastic sticker. But I guess rant over, it's time to fit the GPU, which actually took a few attempts to line up. It's not easy when you can't really see too much in the case. Now normally I'd have my face right in there, making sure it all looked good, but seeing the back of my balding head doesn't really make for good content. But after a few attempts it clicked into place, and at this point I just realised I've built a puzzle box. As I'm not 100% sure how I'd get that GPU out again if I needed to. There's no access to the tabs from the bottom, as that chipset heatsink and fan is in the way, and from the top, well, there's that huge chunk of metal. I think if anything goes wrong or I ever need to replace the card, I'll pretty much have to take the CPU cooler off first, or try and poke something through, as my fingers are definitely not making it through there. And there's also still the matter of powering the GPU, and this is a bit of a mark against the 850X PSU, as it has lots of cables for powering various PCI devices, but each one has two 6+2 connectors on them, and those 2 pins don't really hold nicely against the 6, so it becomes really fiddly. And the way the cables are made means that you end up having a spare connector just sat there, and it would have been nice if they had a cable that just had a single 8-pin connector or that 6+2, it would have made things a lot neater. But apart from that, I think things look relatively tidy on the inside. Now I've not been one for cable management in the past, mostly because the cases I've used were 15 to 20 odd years old, when cable management was using rounded IDE cables. So it really does feel like that Homer meme, with it looking great up front and it's all clips round the back. And so it's time to cross everything and try that first boot. So here we go, power button time, and it lights up, and the screens have detected inputs, but nothing is showing up. Now I have been warned that the first boot can be quite slow, so I should be patient, but I'm really starting to worry. But I can see the GPU RGB lights flash away, so it looks like it is doing something, and there we go. Oh, there's something on the screen. And look, there's the BIOS logo. And, well, it looks like the machine is reset. Oh, and now it's back up. So we have what looks like a booting machine. Oh, thank fuck. That was quite nerve-wracking. As if I needed to reseat everything, it would have been quite the mission. And after a quick look at the BIOS screen, it looks like it's detected everything, which means we're good to go with the OS, which is done from a USB drive, and for the most part this hasn't changed much in a good few years. But can you guess what OS I'm using from this later setup screen? No? Well, I don't blame you, as I don't think many have seen this yet, as it's Windows 11. I figured this was a new PC, so might as well go with the newest OS, and it booted quickly, and everything seems to be very responsive. But that's what I would expect from having a processor with all those threads on it. I've never seen in person so many processor blocks in Task Manager before. And after stress testing it a bit with Prime 95, the temperatures seem to be quite stable as well, so that large lump of metal and the fans are easily doing their job. Now, I tend to like things quite nice and simple when it comes to my case. I've never really gone in for the RGB lighting or having clear sides, which is quite funny when both the motherboard and GPU both support RGB lights, with the graphics card one seemingly always being on. But all that is hidden away inside the case when it gets closed up, so those eventual dust bunnies that might make it inside won't get a bit of sleep. Now at this point it's been almost 2 weeks since I built the machine. Now I've actually made the last few videos on it and it's been absolutely amazing. Vegas Pro 15 just flies on the machine, with the render times being faster than real time, which made a lovely change from it being 2 to 3 times longer than the length of those videos. Gaming has also been awesome, and while initially I wasn't really putting the machine through its paces as I had a few games to finish off, but playing Control on this over the last weekend has been amazing. This is a seriously good looking game, and being Remedy, it has the story and gameplay to back it up. I am massively enjoying this game, to the point that this video was in serious trouble of being delayed, as I just wanted to keep playing it rather than work on this. Windows 11 itself has been fine as well. I had to add one registry hack that enabled the full context menu all the time, but apart from that, I've not really needed to make any other major changes. And I was thinking of doing various benchmarks, but considering the hardware jump and the massive speed increase in Vegas and how well Control runs, I didn't really think it was needed, as I didn't really need anything to convince or highlight to me that speed bump. Also, since that first boot, I've moved over the DVD drive, which actually fits the styling of the case quite nicely, and you might be wondering why I even need it. Well, I actually did play Star Trek Elite Force 2 off that drive just a few months ago. So overall, I'm very happy with the hardware choices that I made. I will admit I spent quite a bit of time reading and watching reviews, learning about all the things that have changed over the last 7 years, like when did motherboard power stages and VRMSs and all this lot become so important? And just as you finally decide on the motherboard, you have to check the quality list to make sure the RAM you got has been tested, as nothing would suck more is if you bought some RAM and you then got some weird compatibility issues and you couldn't get it to run at full speed, particularly with a Ryzen in which the RAM speed is very important. I'm a big fan of the look of this case, and a big fan of those big fans inside of the case. They are mostly quiet and only really kick in when you're doing something extreme, and even then it's still mostly quiet. But I do think the drive activity light could use a different colour to the power light, as it just flashing blue on top of the blue, well, it tends to get a little bit lost. But in every other way, this is a step up from the old case, which didn't really have the best cooling. In fact, when things got really busy, you could actually feel the metal of the case heating up quite badly. So yeah, that wasn't good. And there's no way I'd want to put this machine in that case. So I am very happy with how this machine ended up, and I seriously expect it to last a good while. Will it be another 7 years before I upgrade? Only time will tell. And I will leave you on an appealing montage. So until next time, I was the Goldfish. That was easily the most I've ever spent on a computer, and this was Goldfish on Games. Thank you for watching my video. I do hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, you can let me know down in the comments, or you can use those buttons just below. You know the ones I mean. Or if you're not sure yet, then you can check out 2 other videos that I've done that are on the screen right now. So thank you again, and I hope to see you soon.